Good morning, everyone. It is Tuesday, March 3rd. I'm Errol Barnett at the CBS Broadcast Center here in New York City. It is a big primary day in multiple states. We'll have more on that later this hour, but we begin with the growing conflict and war in the Middle East. The number of Americans killed in the war with Iran now stands at 6. President Trump says the operation could last weeks, and the U.S. is urging Americans to leave the Middle East right now. Israel has launched new strikes on Tehran and Lebanon. The Israeli military says it's going after Hezbollah targets in Beirut. And IDF forces have now moved into southern Lebanon. Later this hour, we'll speak live with a member of Israel's cabinet about that. And we want to show you this new satellite imagery revealing the aftermath of U.S.-Israeli strikes on Iran. Now, this is the compound of Iran's supreme leader, who, as you know, was killed in one of the initial attacks. Yesterday, President Trump explained his rationale for the operation.
An Iranian regime armed with long-range missiles and nuclear weapons would be an intolerable threat to the Middle East, but also to the American people. This was our last best chance to strike.
Now, President Trump has also submitted a war powers notification to Congress about the strikes. He acknowledged, quote, "It is not possible at this time to know the full scope and duration of military operations that may be necessary," end quote. Yesterday, Secretary of State Marco Rubio briefed congressional leaders on Iran. Our Caitlin Huey-Burns pressed him on what was said.
Did you tell lawmakers that there was an imminent
There
threat?
absolutely was an imminent threat, and the imminent threat was that we knew that if Iran was attacked, and we believed they would be attacked, that they would immediately come after us.
There is no imminent threat to the United States of America by the Iranians. There was a threat to Israel.
Of course, we've got team coverage on all of this for you this morning. Ramy Inocencio is tracking what's happening in the Middle East. He's going to join us from London momentarily, but we begin with CBS News correspondent Natalie Brand at the White House. Natalie, good morning once again. What more are we learning about this Gang of Eight briefing on Iran and what President Trump is saying about the U.S. justification for this war?
Good morning, Errol. Let's try to unpack some of the comments, because what we heard there from Secretary of State Rubio is a bit different than what President Trump and the military leaders, the defense secretary and the chairman of the Joint Chiefs talked to reporters about yesterday. President Trump and the Pentagon kind of laid out this case for this being what you heard him say, the last best chance to take care of the threat of nuclear ambitions and also long-range ballistic missiles program that the administration assessed Iran was building. Then we heard Secretary Rubio talk about a more imminent threat, saying that if Iran was attacked by, say, Israel, their assessment was that Iran would strike back against U.S. forces, and this was needed in kind of a defensive way to prevent higher casualties and impact to U.S. assets. So there is some mixed messaging here. Rubio did talk about the concern about missiles and drones with a timeline over the next year, but that imminent threat is really what lawmakers have been concerned about, because you heard the ranking Democrat on the Senate Intelligence Committee, Mark Warner, there saying that he believes there was not an imminent threat. Republicans, allies of the administration, meanwhile, say that they agree with Rubio that this was more of a defensive move. Take a listen to some of the reaction after that Gang of Eight briefing.
I was very satisfied with the briefing. Iran was a great threat to everybody in the region and everybody in the world because it was an evil regime. The Ayatollah is no more. That was not the mission of the U.S. to go in and take out the regime, but that happened.
Look, this is Trump's war. This is a war of choice. He has no strategy. He has no end game.
You heard Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer there accuse the administration of not having a plan. From the Pentagon, we heard yesterday from Secretary Hegseth that this is not a regime change war, but then noting that the regime did change and many more questions remain about who will take over, what happens next. We haven't had a good answer from the White House about that or a timeline. The president yesterday suggesting that initial projections was that this could go 4 to 5 weeks, but it could go longer. And top officials have also not ruled out boots on the ground. While there are no boots on the ground currently, the messaging yesterday was that they're not going to say what could or could not happen in the future, Errol.
Natalie Brand with the latest at the White House for us. Natalie, thanks. Let's jump to CBS News foreign correspondent Ramy Inocencio standing by in our London newsroom. Ramy, good morning. What is the latest on the fighting at this hour? It certainly doesn't appear to be slowing at all.
Absolutely, and that is why all Americans in the Middle East have now been warned to evacuate the region, Errol. And that notice came from the State Department late last night. It named 13 countries from Egypt and Israel in the west to Iran in the east. And frankly, it easily involves tens of thousands of Americans in the region. And because Secretary of State Marco Rubio said yesterday that the hardest hits are yet to come. And we are seeing that now, today, with Israel launching airstrikes on the capitals of both Iran and Lebanon. For example, in Tehran, the IDF says that it struck Iran's presidential office and its National Security Council building. In Beirut, the capital of Lebanon, Israel said that it hit Hezbollah weapons stores along with command centers. And the focus there, again, on southern Beirut's Dahia suburb. This is a stronghold of Hezbollah. And then more Israeli troops, Errol, have gone into southern Lebanon, where Hezbollah has been launching attacks on Israeli border towns. Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu was on Fox News, and there's been this anxiety about the war carrying on for too long. He played down those fears of the U.S. and Israel getting pulled into a war basically with no end. Take a listen.
I hear the people are saying, we're going to have an endless war here. You're not going to have an endless war. This terror regime in Iran is the weakest point that it's been here since it hijacked Iran from the brave Iranian people 47 years ago. So this is going to be a quick and decisive action.
And the latest death toll we're seeing from Iran's Red Crescent is 787, at least there. And the U.S. and Israel have hit a total of 504 locations across the country, Errol.
And due to all of this, Ramy, Americans are being warned by the State Department to evacuate in, I believe, 14 different nations in the region. Update us on that and the damage that Iran is inflicting.
Yes, absolutely. This is a span basically encompassing all of the Middle East, a swath of about 2,000, 2,500 miles all across the region, including the Arabian Peninsula. Notably, that State Department notice said that they needed to find commercial routes. Basically, they needed to find their own way out. Now, in terms of the damage, the destruction that's being inflicted on Americans and American assets, in terms of the people, the number of American service members killed, we now understand, has risen to 6 after bodies were recovered from Iran's initial attack. In terms of U.S. installations, 2 U.S. embassies are now what we're looking at this morning. The embassy in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, was attacked by 2 drones. The embassy in Kuwait is closed until further notice after smoke was seen rising from the mission. Errol.
All right, Ramy Inocencio in London. Thank you. At this moment, Iran is under interim leadership after the killing of the Ayatollah Ali Khamenei. Several top-ranking officials were also killed, as we've been reporting. And now the country faces an historic transition without a clear successor while under attack. Alex Vatanka is a senior fellow at the Middle East Institute in Washington and joins us now to discuss what may come next. Alex, good morning. This is a tough question to answer, but it's informative for our viewers to understand what the process may be. Good morning to you. Who could the next supreme leader be? What does the succession process look like right now, considering the country is in war, is at war?
Good morning, Errol. Let me just point out that the Islamic Republic that was born in 1979 has only had one succession in its history. That happened back in 1989. It happened at peacetime. The country was not at war, certainly not as is right now, and there were no protesters in the streets the way that we've seen recently in Iran. So in other words, the country had sort of a stable political environment. They chose a supreme leader, Ali Khamenei, who was just assassinated on Saturday. He was a surprise candidate. He wasn't chosen because he was a top religious figure. And that, I think, is very telling. He was chosen because he was the most politically expedient for the regime in terms of continuity. And I suspect something like that might happen now. As what's left of the regime is thinking about what's best for the regime ship going forward, the question of continuity and who might make sense most politically, I think, is the most relevant for them. And the other thing I have to add, Errol, is this: who is left? Because the U.S. and Israel are bombing these people or assassinating these people. Who is left to take over is also a very important question.
So is one of the Ayatollah's sons a likely successor? Reza Pahlavi has been speaking to CBS News and other outlets and says he's a realistic transitional leader. Is that likely?
So when we talk about supreme leader, we talk in the context of the Islamic Republic. And in the context of the Islamic Republic, Khamenei, the guy the Ayatollah who was assassinated on Saturday, he never really had a deputy. He never pointed to anyone specifically. He just didn't like to share the stage with anyone. But we do know he gave some names out in case he was, assassinated. I mean, might be one of those individuals. I can give you names. One of those individuals could be the person. But really, what comes down to is this: who has the political muscle at the time within the various factions of what's left of the Islamic Republic to sort of decide where to go from here. You mentioned Crown Prince Reza Pahlavi. That's a very different scenario. That's if the Islamic Republic collapses and something very different could come in and replace it.
All right, Alex Vatanka, we appreciate your insight and joining us this morning. Thank you.
Thank you.
Now, Iran's retaliatory airstrikes targeting U.S. and Israeli interests have hit multiple nations in the Middle East, including the UAE and Bahrain. Some Middle East regional experts have cited the Abraham Accords as a key factor in shaping today's current landscape. And Iran's escalation could push more nations to consider joining that very agreement. CBS News correspondent Michael George joins us now with much more on this. Really interesting, Michael. Good morning.
Errol, good morning. So let's break this down. The 2020 Abraham Accords marked the first normalization agreement between an Arab nation and Israel since 1994. Before that, Egypt and Jordan were the only Arab nations to recognize and work with the state of Israel. Bahrain and the UAE signed the Abraham Accords in September 2020, establishing diplomatic relations with Israel, and Morocco signed a few months later in December. Now, in the 5 years since the agreement, all three countries have worked with Israel on security matters. That includes joint military exercises and intelligence sharing. And there's also been growing economic cooperation, especially between the UAE and Israel. Those two countries traded more than $6 billion in goods between 2021 and 2024, according to the UN, Errol.
So, Michael, now that we have the Abraham Accords, I should ask, how exactly have these Abraham Accords factored into the conflict as we see it?
Yeah, that's a good question. So Iran has strongly opposed the Abraham Accords. And as recently as 2 weeks ago, 51 members of the Iranian parliament urged the country's government to adopt a, quote, revolutionary stance against them. In fact, some Iranians, such as former Foreign Minister Mohammad Javad Zarif, have pushed their own version of an alliance called the Muslim West Asian Dialogue Association. It would align all Muslim nations around security and economic issues and exclude Israel, according to The Economist and the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. Now, there hasn't been any significant movement to establish this counter-alliance to the Abraham Accords. Some of the first targets of Iran's retaliation included notably Bahrain and the UAE. The Abraham Accord signatories have had locations with ties to U.S. and Israeli interests in both their countries struck. Errol?
All right, Michael George, thank you very much.